But ultimately, for me, every time I see somebody blogging about Jason Goes to Hell, or about, quite frankly, about any of the Friday the 13th films, I feel really lucky that they care enough to actually spend the time and energy talking about this character. For me, I really learned to always respect every audience. Respect every audience. Respect every audience.
Hello, and welcome to Confused Reviews, where our cartoon drawing reviews movies, and it's time to once again revisit a flick from the enormous Friday the 13th franchise, and as a matter of fact, the worst one of the bunch. But it's not the iffy second one where the series hadn't quite found its footing, or the mismarketed Manhattan mess that was Part 8. No, it's one that's much, much worse. Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. But before we dump out the bag of garbage that is Part 9, I feel it crucial to go back and just explain how and why this movie turned out the way it did. First, we have to travel all the way back to 1989, where Jason Takes Manhattan slashed its way onto the silver screen. While it was the most ambitious and expensive entry to date, it was slaughtered by audiences and critics alike. It also, more importantly, was the lowest grossing entry in the series thus far, and proved to be the perfect opportunity for Paramount to pawn off the F-13 franchise. Now you see, Paramount had always been embarrassed of Jason's successful series throughout the 80s. Well, not the money, because God knows they loved the Scrooge McDuck levels of money it made, but the fact that they were all bashed critically and were seen as cheap entertainment. And as a result, once the series stopped making money hand over fist, they decided to have the big guy pack up his hockey mask and knives and sold off the series to New Line Cinema, which, if you somehow don't know, is the studio that was built from the ground up by another famous slasher icon. Once Mr. Voorhees was in the grasp of Freddy's finger knives, the idea of a Freddy vs. Jason movie once again began swirling. And producer Sean S. Cunningham was really trying to get the movie made, but the studio told him he had to put that movie on hold, instead opting to make another solo Jason flick first. Sean then got to work as Adam Marcus was hired to direct, with Huguely to write. But that original script was reportedly 10 shades of awful and impossible to understand, which, being the final film is arguably even worse than that, I can't imagine what that first draft looked like. Pressed for time and a deadline coming up quick, Cunningham hired Dean Lorey to completely rewrite the script. In 4 days. To make matters worse, Adam Marcus, fresh out of film school, got the chance to direct the 9th movie at the brisk age of 23, mainly because Sean wanted to avoid Adam not getting hired to direct other projects because he was a first-time director. And seeing what Oscar winners Marcus went on to craft, that was obviously the right choice, and certainly didn't have anything to do with this movie's lack of quality, and also lead it to be known as one of the worst horror movies ever produced. Another thing that led to this movie to be dead on arrival was the fact that Sean wanted Adam to not only do anything he could to remove Jason's iconic hockey mask from the story, but also not pick up after Jason Takes Manhattan. Instead choosing to ignore all the sequels, follow up right after the 1980 original, and only use bits and pieces from the sequels, mainly Part 2. Which raises the obvious question, why would you make a 9th movie following Jason Voorhees, yet only use information and lore from the first movie? You know, the one where he isn't killing people? And if you were curious as to why this movie doesn't have the Friday the 13th name attached, that's because Paramount only allowed them the rights to Jason, not the title. For some reason. And to add salt to the wound, they had the audacity to call this the final movie. Again! Oh, and one more thing before we get into this, is that the plot of this movie is eerily similar to the underrated 1987 film The Hidden, where a murderous psycho is killed very early on, only for a demon alien to transfer into another body to continue the killing spree. Versus the Final Friday story, where a murderous psycho is killed very early on, only for a demon monster to transfer into another body to continue the killing spree.
It's reminiscent of the Hidden, which I hadn't even seen before we wrote Jason. So we were like, wow, that's coincidental. Uh-oh.
Uh-huh. Sure you didn't. So let's hop head first into this platter of shit burgers and dissect this rotten corpse of a movie to see just exactly how you can screw up a movie this bad. This is Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. So this disaster begins with one lone girl making her way to Crystal Lake. The dense dumbass makes herself at home and immediately hits the shower. Guess she got really worked up walking upstairs. That and the fact that we've got to meet the slasher movie TNA quota. As soon as she gets down to business, the power inevitably goes out and a familiar friend returns. Alright, hold it. Now, I'm not going to harp on the fact that Jason looks different, because even though he now looks like shit, it was never a tradition held up all that well from movie to movie. I am, however, extremely concerned of how Jason went from a pile of sewer scum to a fully reformed guy with a new metal mask. At the very least, the movies would hold up a baseline continuity, starting the big guy off where he ended up at the end of the previous movie. Now he miraculously hopped back to his old stomping grounds without a second spent on explaining how it happened. It's basically like reading the first 8 chapters of a Friday the 13th book, only to tear out every chapter but the first and half of the second, and then just diving back into it like nothing happened. Also, there was apparently a comic book that bridged the gap between 8 and 9, but that doesn't help the movie's case, and I haven't read it. Elizabeth Marcus, played by Julie Michaels, falls off the balcony in a Freddy Krueger fashion, only to run outside and hood slide in a way that would disappoint the Duke boys. She somehow managed to check off every dumb girl in a horror movie trope during the escape, eventually landing right in Jason's grasp, or so he thinks as the Friday night lights flip on.
Open fire! Everybody out!
Yep, you saw that right. Her going to Crystal Lake was all a ploy to lure Jay out into the open to be executed by a barrage of military personnel. Are you sure this movie wasn't written by a 5-year-old who thought Jason meeting the A-Team would be a cool idea? He gets enough holes blown into him to be considered human Swiss cheese, and also begins grunting. I can't sit here and say, oh, Jason shouldn't speak, because that would simply be hypocritical, because one of his main things he's known for is his classic... But did they have to make him sound like he's dropping a massive shit? Gross. And as the cherry atop this diarrhea sundae of an opening scene, he explodes. Now, as much as I'd love to say that's the end and wrap it up right there, it's not. I could actually see Jason being defeated in this way and it turning out cool. Maybe Tommy Jarvis is sick of trying to temporarily put down the hockey player and decides to take drastic measures. Or Tina uses an evolved set of psychic powers to make Jay's heart erupt. Anything would make more sense than loosely continuing the series timeline than just throwing in some random dumbass hired men shooting the imposter killer. Also, how the hell did Jason not hear or see this entire operation being set up? He knows that campground like the back of his yellow glove, so unless he got back from New York mere minutes before Liz arrived, I can't imagine him not knowing about it. We hop over to the morgue to see the coroner, played by Richard Grant, rolling the bastard in for an autopsy. We then see the opening credits intercut in just... the worst way possible. The way it's spliced into the movie is so jarring, it's like getting hit in the head with a tack hammer every 10 seconds. Like, imagine that happened to me See? He inspects our guy piece by piece, and... Okay, now that's enough. Stop! After that cinematic whiplash, he examines Jay's elephant heart, only for it to start beating. It's also at this moment when Phil realizes he skipped dinner and decides to take a little free sample.
What is that joke? What is that? What is that? What is Hitler? What is Stalin? What is Mao? What is all this stuff?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for everyone in the room, but that might be the most batshit crazy thing I've ever seen in a motion picture. What the fuck is this movie? Whether he was hypnotized by Jay's heart, or however the hell it happened, this weird possession thing is so out of left field I don't even know how to approach it correctly. Sure, you can try and defend it by using the classic, "it's trying something new" argument, but that's just like saying it's a good idea to drink a liver, eggplant, and candy corn smoothie just because you never have before. Or at least I hope. Anyways, Jason's essence, or mojo, or whatever, swirls into his body. Phil's assistant, played by the movie's writer, Dean Lorey, says some choice words to the dismembered fella.
How you doing, you fat-ass, maggoty, blown-up fuck?
He then wastes no time diving back into his old habits, killing this talentless hack with some Wolverine cosplay. At least the movie gave me that. Jason decides to bounce, and even makes easy work of some asshat and Kane Hodder. You know, Jason himself.
He wasn't nothing but a big old pussy anyway.
Too bad they couldn't even respect the man by killing him on screen. Now, that's just shameful. We're then subjected to a TV segment recapping the body count for every goldfish in the audience. After that, we meet Creighton Duke, played by Stephen Williams, who is presented as being some series alumni or important figure, but I've never heard of the fucking guy. Supposedly, a backstory was written for Duke, but scrapped, because, you know, why would you need that? So now we're left with this random dipshit posing as Jason's grand nemesis. Again, this would have been a golden opportunity to get Tommy Jarvis back into the action, considering he actually has experience with Jason. As a matter of fact, any of the final girls returning to take him down would have been a more enjoyable movie. Like, say they band together, forming a ragtag team to stop the big guy once and for all. You know, because this was meant to be the final fucking movie!
Jason Voorhees.
Well, that makes me think of a little girl in a pink dress, sticking a hot dog through a donut.
Fuck you.
Creighton continues to yammer on about how he can guarantee he'll take down the brute.
Quite a character.
But something is screaming in my ear saying, no, he's not. We then bounce over to a diner to see Diana, played by Erin Gray. She's then blessed by Creighton's presence, who orders food that sounds just as appetizing as something you'd find at your local Denny's.
I'll take a Voorhees burger and a side of Jason fingers.
Ugh. Diana is then bombarded by the Duke with questions and info pertaining to Mr. Voorhees until they're interrupted by Sheriff Landis, played by Billy Green Bush. Creighton reacts as you'd expect.
Why don't you blow me, Chief?
And after a Lenny-style punch catch, he throws around a few more playground-level insults until getting himself arrested.
I don't think you really know who I am.
That's ironic, because no one does!
See, she is only your lady because she ain't had a taste of the Duke yet.
Who?
After that moronic display, she chats it up with Steve Freeman, played by Friday the 13th The Series star John D. LeMay. Diana explains that there is a super important secret that Steve just has to know, and instead of revealing it, they just don't. Later that night, we see Steven jamming out, and even generously picks up 3 bimbos in need of a ride. Alexis, Deborah, and Luke, played by Catherine Atwood, Michelle Clooney, and Michael B. Silver.
Planning on smoking a little dope, having a little premarital sex, and getting slaughtered?
Wow, that sounded like that wasn't the first time this has happened. I wouldn't be all that shocked if he pulled out a pamphlet for them. I assume this is an attempt to recapture some of that self-aware magic used in Jason Lives, but the difference is, well, that movie was good.
Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
This warning, of course, doesn't deter their mission in the slightest, and the 3 arrive rather quickly. Okay, that doesn't really happen, but for how terribly it was incorporated earlier, I could see them having a little left in the tank. Alexis runs to take a quick leak, only to be killed via shaky cam. The remaining 2 take a quick timeout to get down to business, but as we all know,
no timeouts, only death.
To make matters worse, they not only broke rule number 1 of the slasher formula, they also made a huge mistake. As we all know, Jason's always been a huge advocator of abstinence and safe sex, so this is basically like sticking a middle finger in his face. And now that I think about it, since this copycat killer can technically speak, he might as well run through the forest screaming,
"Who's the slimy little communist shit twinkle-toed cocksucker down here who just signed his own death warrant?"
I mean, why the hell not at this point? Anywho, these fornicating fucks are then interrupted by Phil cock-blocking them by impaling Deborah with a pole. And the only difference between the theatrical and unrated cut is we see a bit more boobage as well as her torso getting ripped in half. Now, I see a lot of people defend this terrible kill, and allow me to retort. If this sequence was placed smack dab in the middle of the final chapter, or even the New Blood, I'd probably love it, but it's ruined entirely by the fact that the one who did it is someone who doesn't even remotely act or look like Jason. Plus, I doubt this guy has enough strength to literally rip a woman in half, even if he somehow has Jason's essence or whatever. Imagine if in Dream Warriors, Philip's amazing death was done by a fat guy with a top hat on. The cool factor immediately vanishes. Oh, and Luke dies of God knows what. We spend 2 days watching her leave the diner until she's jump scared.
Got it! Me! Gosh!
Okay, relax, Sheriff Brackett.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I mean, you of all people should know it's a fantastic idea to sneak up on someone in the middle of the night. Idiot. Said cop is then picked up by Edna, played by Diana Greig. She's already dead. Why even have her in the movie at all? If the whole point was to kidnap Josh, why not just attack him once he's in his cruiser? Ah, fuck it. Once we move away from that shit, we see that they couldn't even spell the Voorhees name correctly. This isn't even a joke. Like, how hard would it have been to go back and rewatch any of the previous movies that show how the name is meant to be spelled? This is just pathetic at this point. This garbage scene goes from bad to total shitstorm when we're immediately thrown into a grown man being shaved naked on a table.
Oh, God, what is this?
I'm sure you're beyond confused and asking why the hell they'd include a scene like this, and the explanation is just as stupid as you'd imagine.
Let's even the score. Something for the ladies.
Except the difference is that all the women shown are extremely attractive. Why not use a physically fit and muscular type for a scene like this, not an out-of-shape hairy guy? Weird. Oh, and the whole shaving thing's only purpose is for the homoerotic moment, because we'll soon find out Jason's aura can be transferred without this random-ass ritual. This almost feels as out of place as that bar scene in Freddy's Revenge. Almost, because even that was handled more gracefully. Diana then starts chatting with her daughter Jessica, played by Kari Keegan, but the chat is interrupted by Josh, who shows in a conveniently placed mirror that Jason is his reflection. Okay, when it happens to vampires, it's cool and shows their lack of humanity and soul. Here it just makes me wish more than anything that Jason was in this movie physically, and not some schlubby Paul Blart. Officer Voorhees doesn't realize that no means no, and whips out his venom tongue.
Like a turd in the wind.
That is, until Steven barges in awkwardly, like in The Truman Show, and takes the crappy cop down. He's quickly dispatched until Diana gets a knife sharpener to the spine. Why wouldn't you use one of the actual knives? I know you just got shot in the head, but come on, Jay. Steven is a little upset by this and rams a fire poker through the prick, as well as standing there letting the deputy James Bond it out the window. I mean, it did look like Jason did that to himself, running around like the Mask instead of killing the guy. He checks on Diana, who tells him, in a moment so poorly acted I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be a joke, to watch out for Jessica. Basically saying,
That's a surprise
character
that can help us later.
Because honestly, only someone under the age of 4 wouldn't be able to figure this out. The swinging dick sheriff arrives, and Josh is long gone. Reminds me of another iconic movie moment. I just can't put my butcher knife on it. But bottom line is the real culprit is gone, and Steven is now alone with a corpse. Not looking too good for this mix of the brain and the athlete. Freeman gets locked up tight and is soon introduced to our old pal Creighton. He gives the only halfway decent performance thus far, but it's sideswiped by him creepily groping Steven's hands. This moment would have been instantly cooler if it would have just stayed on Duke's face, but no, they had to ruin it with this.
Pretty bird. Yeah, can you say pretty bird? Pretty bird.
Steven keeps begging for the method to kill Jason, but Creighton's only willing to give it up for those who are willing to pay. Well, that is until the Duke of Hazzard breaks a couple of Steven's fingers like Denzel would. He explains that her daughter is the key to everything, and it sounds more and more like Halloween 6 by the minute, so let's just keep moving.
In a Voorhees was he born. Through a Voorhees may he be reborn.
Fuck you!
Vicky, played by Allison Smith, brings Jessica's baby back to the diner, and Joey, played by Rusty Schwimmer, is a tad bit upset about it.
It's Jessica's baby.
Get it the fuck out. This is a restaurant, not a fucking nursery.
I know I'm supposed to be upset because she's being a bitch, but she's not wrong. It's a fucking restaurant. Vicky hides the little twerp just as we find out Steven wasn't too far behind them. Also, for the fantastic Crystal Lakes Memory documentary, they got the actress who played Jessica's baby to be a part of it.
I played baby Stephanie in Jason Goes to Hell. When I made the film, I was about 6 months old. I have little to no memory about being in the film considering I was so young.
This has nothing to do with the scene itself, and even though it is in fact 10 times more interesting, I just thought it was funny that they found her once she was all grown up and decided to interview her. Back to the movie, Steven is given a set of keys and heads straight back over to the Voorhees house. Which is a phrase that sounds so sacrilegious I feel like I should wash my mouth out with soap just for uttering such a dumbass phrase. Unless it's being featured in a Froggy Fresh music video. Stevenson miraculously discovers the fucking Necronomicon, so I guess Ash and the Deadites definitely exist in Jason's universe, as well as the fact that Mr. Marcus wanted to make Jason a Deadite. Which not only opens up another gigantic can of worms that isn't even realistically worth trying to figure out. I doubt Ash was all that psyched to hear the news.
Fuck.
The asshat news anchor from earlier winds up in the same location, sporting a tie worse than the mayor in Jaws, and since it's been 5 seconds since Jason body hopped, Josh resurfaces and regurgitates a demon slug into Rob's mouth. And as an added bonus, Josh just fucking melts. Yeah, sure, it looks neat, but why the hell does this happen? It doesn't happen to Phil and just seems like another flat attempt to do something cool. Which it isn't. Jess then takes a classic F-13 shower, only for, you guessed it, the power to go out. I didn't edit that, that's the real movie. I guess they only had half a second shot of the fuse box. Doesn't even shock me anymore. She reunites with a now possessed Robert and is not even remotely fazed by the blood all over him, only to be saved by Steve once again. Man, this guy seems like he's just waiting off screen for the characters to get really close to death and then step in. Oh, and there's another display of editing so terrible, I'm not sure how it made it into the final cut.
Get away from her!
The two get the hell out of Dodge, but not before running over the douchebag as if he was the creeper. Steven explains that it was all the work of Jason, so Jess, justifiably, kicks him out of the car and leaves him on the side of the road. It's odd that the opposite of what the movie wants me to feel is the logical choice. He's left waiting for a hitchhike, only for his buddy to return after he locked him in his own cell earlier, and they measure the size of their guns.
I got a gun. Fuck that. I got a gun.
Good. Bad. I'm the guy with the gun.
Rob shows up at the station and even tosses this turd's director.
What the? No!
And I think being thrown in a wood chipper would have been a more justified response for releasing this movie, but at least Creighton knocks out the cocksucker. The whole gang winds up together, and after a few slick maneuvers, Steven steals Randy's gun. Again, and blows Rob to shit. But since we all know he's nowhere near dead, they might as well have had Chris Traeger pop in and say,
I'm dead.
Again, we hop over to the diner, and Large Marge here continues running at the mouth.
Nobody's gonna touch that fucking ray of sunshine!
Only to encourage her son to go outside with a serial killer on the loose. Let's see how well that turns out. Big Fly fan, I see. Shelby, Joey's boy toy, is then turned into a human corn dog, and as a 2-for-1 deal, Joey gets her jaw pushed in? She looks like a vacuum cleaner. Meanwhile, Vicky continues to be the only person in the restaurant doing anything to stop fake Jason, shooting him again, and practicing her javelin skills. Her Olympic training is cut short when he pulls her onto the pole as well, and she dies. Bummer. Dollar store Leah Thompson decides to once again leave Freeman behind. She rolls up to the house, per Duke's instruction, and they get acquainted. Just when you assume they couldn't possibly spring any more bullshit onto the plot, they magically have the Kondarian dagger, too. If Creighton winds up with a chainsaw for an arm, I'm gonna fucking lose. Duke explains that only a Voorhees can fully take down a Voorhees, and I'm starting to suspect that he's just making this up as he goes. He then falls through the rotten floorboards, impaling his leg just as Randy and the sheriff show up.
Duke, what should I do?
Kill both of them! Do it or die!
My goodness, what an idea.
Why didn't I think of that?
They do a good old-fashioned game of who's the real Jason, eventually leading to Ed dying and Randy turning out to be the surrogate, which throws a whole nother wrench into this tangled and fucked rulebook. Being Jason seems pretty well spoken, all things considered. I know they made them both speak to keep the mystery up in the air, but that's not my point. They shouldn't have done it at all. Jason didn't need to speak because he was absolutely terrifying already. It seems like with every passing minute, they managed to do something even stupider in hopes of subverting expectations. Steven three-peats his ever-convenient timing, decapitating Randy and perfectly leading us into what might be my least favorite thing in this entire 12-picture franchise. That's right, Jason is a demonic rat creature. It gets thrown away just like you would a normal rodent infesting your house, and we get more BS logic from Creighton.
That part about being reborn through a Voorhees woman, does it have to be a living woman?
So, if it could have done that the whole time, why didn't it stay in the basement when he first killed Diana? Or sneak into the diner when the baby was alone? Or when he returned to hear Robert's disgusting, high-ratings-fueled plot? Oh, right, because they too are making this up as they go along. Are you sure they didn't accidentally use the original script that everybody thought was so awful? You know, maybe swap the two envelopes by mistake? Because this seems to fit the bill. So after they drag Creepshow down with this movie as well, placing the crate from that movie next to Diana's corpse, the rat slug thingy inserts itself into Diana.
I don't know what the that was.
And after catapulting upstairs, Jason returns. Oh yeah, he's in this movie.
Son of a bitch. You remember me?
Nope.
Plus, not only does Creighton immediately die via a tiny backache, but Jessica also drops the dagger back into the basement. So, this useless character went out being completely useless. Huh. Steven tosses Jay out the window, the Hound style, and the big man gets back into the swing of things, literally by beating the piss out of Freeman with the butt end of a rake. Surprisingly, Steven doesn't take it lying down, and even puts up a decent fight against the guy.
Wolfman's got nards!
Steve decides he's had enough of this shit and makes his way up a randomly placed jungle gym. After Jessica returns and decides to finally be useful, she pulls a Drax on her main man Jason, plunging the dagger into his chest. This then, I think, turns Jason into a Roman candle, spraying bright lights up into the heavens, only for giant Muppet arms to erupt from the ground and drag the bastard down to hell. And I thought Jason Takes Manhattan had a lazy, confusing, contrived ending. At least that had one sliver of a good idea. This seems like they brainstormed the worst way to end it, and then just ended up using it because they were short on time. So Jason's toast, I guess, and the two leads literally walk off into the sunset. Seems to me like someone failed their introductory screenwriting course. Oh, and we can't forget the only thing people remember from this ending.
Fucking Freddy versus Jason tease!
Yeah, for some reason, they end the movie with Fred's glove dragging the mask into the dirt. I have 3 things wrong with this. 1, we saw Jason's mask go down with his body 5 seconds ago, so did it float back to the top like it was water? 2, Freddy's Dead took place in the year 2000, and this is supposedly set in 2003, because both timelines got really fucky. So how did Freddy do this? And 3rd, I find it hilarious that they ended this movie with this, knowing that it would be an entire decade before the finished product released. And that was Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday. And before I get into what I didn't care for in it, I'd just like to say that I'm sure there were at least 5 or 6 semi-talented people that worked on this, and I'm sure they at least attempted to make something halfway watchable. So what I'm saying is that I'm not trying to personally attack or offend anyone when discussing a movie of this particular caliber. That being said, this movie is fucking shit!
Straight from the bottom of Satan's asshole!
I mean, wow. The fact that this flaming train wreck was written in only 4 days really shows. For starters, the thing that everyone expects me to go after, the lack of Jason in his bulky physical form. Sure, that is really stupid and immediately throws this movie to the floor before anything else, but to me that's only where the problems begin. The real trouble forms when they decided to try to rework the series by taking a flamethrower to the lore and rules set in place by 8 previous installments. Jason was originally a deformed boy who survived drowning, brought back only by his mother's need for revenge. It was heavily implied that he survived in the woods for years, only to ruthlessly murder anyone who came back to his campground. He did that, stacking up a body count like no other, only to be killed by the only person who could stop him. He was then reborn through a bolt of ill-placed lightning and continued his terror until finally being stopped and left for dead in a seedy New York sewer. That's the gist of the first 8 films, aside from Part 5's sort of side quest. But now he's somehow alive, intact, and back at Crystal Lake without a clue of how he got back there and his new fancy metal mask. One thing I think the earlier movies did perfectly was give a recap of the movies so far, not only to catch up newcomers, but show that they themselves were pushing the series forward, rather than just ignoring what came before. Then Jason Goes to Hell starts and instantly sends the series 8 steps back. Plus, they decided to not only ignore the past flicks, try their hardest to axe the big guy physically, but dump a series worth of new lore, characters, and rules without paying any of it off. Since when could Jason body hop? Why does the mere sight of his black oozing heart make someone want to wolf it down? How come this gives them not only the mojo of Jason, but his hulking strength too, regardless of the person's actual size? Since when was Jay able to be reborn in the exact same clothes as when he previously died, by crawling up a dead Voorhees' snatch? What are these white rubber hands, and where do they take Jason? Hell, I assume, but who really knows? And my biggest question, why did anyone think this would work? You want to redo Jason with new lore and resurrection rules? Fine, but do a remake instead. Don't try to pawn these awful ideas off as canon in a timeline with good movies in it. Next, I'd like to discuss one thing I still can't fathom why it gets praise. Creighton Duke. I wouldn't say I hate him, and I think he's got potential, but my bullshit alarm begins to sound when they hype him up as if he's some series-long character and been fighting the Brute since the beginning. Nope, he's just some wannabe badass that's thrown in here to shout out new made-up stuff. He reminds me a lot of Captain Marvel, a character that's introduced after the ball's already rolling, built up as if they're the best of the best and that we should be invested in them, only to have as much depth as a cardboard cutout. He shows up here, says some raunchy nonsense, sits in a jail cell for the entire middle, and then dies. He never even fights him. I know this isn't a new idea, but why the hell was this role not given to Tommy Jarvis? That way it'd make more sense, being he's been linked to this shit for 3 movies, has the experience and actual knowledge of how to stop Jason, and it wouldn't feel as jarring when they toss in this demonic, culty, Evil Dead ripoff shit in the movie. Why not introduce Jason's dad? They were so hellbent on exploring themes of family again, like in the original, so why not test the waters of Jason's father? He was meant to show up in Jason Lives, back when the series wasn't hot garbage, and I think this would have been a perfect time to explore it. His mother's story has been told, so maybe show how Pamela's death affected Elias, or even better, have him be the one hunting Jason. Picture this. Jason was not only the jewel of Pam's eye, but drove a wedge between her and her husband, which is a large contributor to why Elias left the two. After Jason supposedly drowned, he tried to come back and console his ex-wife, but she's so distraught and hysterical, it's pointless to even speak, and he leaves for good. After she's eventually killed, this sends Elias into a rage and depression, knowing he was never able to make amends with his estranged wife. So once he finds out that Jason is still alive and killing people, he makes it his life's mission to track down and take down his supernatural son for not only costing him his marriage, but the lives of so many innocent teenagers. It could have created a great family dynamic like in the original, but also pushed the series in a fresh, new direction. Oh, and most of all, wouldn't have had moronic body hopping and demon creatures that make no sense.
Yes, are they going to blog incessantly about the color of someone's suit? Sure.
And to the asshat Adam Marcus. I couldn't give 2 fucks about the color of the big man's suit, hockey mask, or fucking socks. My problem arises when you not only craft an unoriginal story with terrible dialogue and uninteresting characters, but comes to a boil when you pull the rug from underneath the continuity of the franchise and shit out a terrible movie that makes the series' low points look like Oscar winners. It manages to make my terrible skits look like they should be placed in the Library of Congress. And that's not something to be proud of. And to Sean S. Cunningham,
fuck you too!
Because the more and more I look into this movie, it becomes apparent that Sean wanted all of that established Jason stuff removed, not because he was trying something new, but more so because he seems jealous that he wasn't the one who made Jason who he is today. He didn't make Jay the killer, didn't give him his hockey mask, or make him a household name. No, Sean made a Halloween ripoff set in the woods, with a mother exacting revenge for her child. While on the one hand, I heavily respect Cunningham for being the diving off point to this franchise, I also look down upon him in a way for taking a steaming dump on a franchise that left him behind in 1980. Paramount wounded this franchise when they sold away the rights, and these 2 bozos delivered the finishing blow when they decided to release this putrid, disgusting, monstrous mess to the world. And whether my speculation is correct or not, it's extremely odd to say the least. This mucus-covered turd is one of the worst movies I've ever laid eyes on. From horrendous writing, helpless characters, a clear lack of creativity, bullshit rearranged logic, and removing of the best aspects of this franchise, lands it right alongside the other movies that I'd place in the Hall of Hell, where it can be set right alongside 4 other worthless disasters that I've dissected. These are some of the worst relics that humanity has to offer, and even though I'd place it at the end, in a way, I might dislike this one more than any of them. Well, except for that one. With all that said and my blood pressure nearing a heart attack, it's time to give my verdict for this shit show and finally rid it of my conscience forever. I'm going to give Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, a full-forced, relentless, unapologetic... To this day, it baffles me quite a bit that this chaotic, confusing clusterfuck even exists. Don't waste your precious time on this bullshit. I'm Confused Reviews. Thanks for watching.